A black cleaning lady's daughter speaks 9 languages, said the son of a white CEO. Mrs. Harrison laughed but was shocked. Ha ha! 9 languages. Mr. Harrison's laughter echoed through the Manhattan penthouse office like the roar of a predator, amused by its prey. Girl, you can barely speak English. Sarah Johnson, just 14 years old, stood in the luxurious office holding a worn public school backpack, her eyes steady in contrast to the humiliation burning her cheeks. Beside her, her mother, Grace Johnson, 42, held the cleaning bucket with trembling hands, knowing she had made a terrible mistake in bringing her daughter to work. Mr. Harrison, a 48-year-old tech tycoon and owner of a $3.5 billion empire, was having the best day of fun he'd had in weeks. This black kid, the daughter of his cleaning lady, had just claimed she spoke 9 languages when he doubted she could read an entire book in English. "Sarah, please apologize to Mr. Harrison," Grace whispered, her voice heavy with years of submission and fear of losing the job that supported her 2 children on her own. "No need to apologize," Mr. Harrison said, enjoying himself even more. "I want to hear more of this fantasy. Tell me, girl wonder, what are these 9 languages you speak?" Sarah took a deep breath. At 14, she had already learned that the world judged people like her and her mother before even getting to know them. Daughter of a cleaning lady, black, living in the Bronx, all labels that men like Harrison used to justify their contempt. English, Spanish, French, German, Arabic, Mandarin, Russian, Italian, and Portuguese, Sarah replied calmly, each word spoken with a clarity that made Harrison stop laughing for a second. "Liar," Harrison declared, returning to his Italian marble desk. "Grace, your daughter has serious fantasy issues. Maybe you should take her to a psychiatrist instead of bringing her here." Grace lowered her head, feeling the weight of familiar humiliation. For 5 years, she had cleaned that office, endured derogatory comments, and accepted low wages because she needed that job. But seeing her daughter, her bright and determined Sarah, being ridiculed in this way was a pain that cut deeper than any personal insult. "Mom?" Sarah said softly, touching her arm. "It's okay." Harrison watched the interaction with a cruel smile. He loved these moments of absolute power when he could remind people of their place in the social hierarchy. He had built his empire not only through business acumen, but through a calculated cruelty that destroyed anyone who dared to question him. "You know what I think, Grace?" Harrison leaned back in his $15,000 leather chair. "I think your daughter is jealous of my executive's children who attend expensive private schools, so she makes up these fantasies to feel special." "Sir," Sarah interrupted, her voice still calm, but laden with a dignity that surprised Harrison. "Do you speak German?" Harrison frowned. "Of course I do. I spent a year in Berlin." "Then you would understand if I said Die Wahrheit wird sich immer durchsetzen," Sarah said. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison stared at Sarah, processing the perfect words in classical German he had just heard. This wasn't the basic German that any tourist could memorize. It was a complex structure with advanced grammar and impeccable pronunciation. Grace looked between her daughter and Harrison, sensing that something had changed in the air, but not understanding what Sarah had said. Where did you learn that?" Harrison asked, genuinely confused for the first time in years. Sarah smiled for the first time since she had entered that office. "At the public library, sir. They have free language programs every afternoon." Harrison felt something strange stirring in his chest, a mixture of surprise and something that could be respect. No, that was impossible. She was just a kid who had memorized a few phrases. "Anyone can memorize a phrase," Harrison said, trying to regain control. "That doesn't mean you speak the language." "You're right, sir," Sarah agreed. "That's why I brought this." Sarah opened her worn backpack and pulled out a document that made Harrison choke. It was an official certificate of proficiency in multiple languages issued by Yale University, with grades indicating fluency in all 9 languages Sarah had mentioned. "That's fake," Harrison stammered. But his voice no longer carried the same conviction. Sarah took out another piece of paper. "This is my certificate from the Advanced Linguistics program at the Municipal Library. And this is from the online simultaneous translation course I finished last month." Harrison took the documents with trembling hands. They were all authentic, all stamped and signed by reputable institutions. This 14-year-old kid, the daughter of his cleaning lady, had achieved a level of education that rivaled professional diplomats. How? Was all Harrison could whisper. What Harrison didn't know was that Sarah Johnson had a secret much bigger than simply speaking 9 languages. And that secret was about to destroy everything Harrison thought he knew about intelligence, merit, and the true value of people. What Harrison didn't realize was that Sarah hadn't shown up at that office by chance. For months, she had been planning this moment, gathering information and preparing a demonstration that would not only change Harrison's perception of her, but reveal a truth about Harrison himself that would destroy everything the billionaire thought he knew about himself. Harrison examined the certificates for several minutes, desperately searching for some evidence of forgery. But the more he looked, the more his arrogance turned into something close to panic. The signatures were authentic, the stamps official, the dates consistent with a 3-year academic progression. "That still doesn't prove anything," Harrison muttered more to himself than to Sarah. "Anyone can take online courses." "You're right," Sarah agreed with a calmness that made Harrison even more uncomfortable. "That's why I brought this." Sarah took a tablet out of her backpack and opened a video chat app. Within seconds, the screen showed a Hispanic woman in an academic office. "Professor Ramirez," Sarah said in perfect Spanish, "could you confirm to Mr. Harrison my performance in your business translation course?" The woman on the screen replied in rapid, fluent Spanish. Harrison didn't understand a word, but he could hear the natural flow of the conversation, the complexity of the grammatical structures, the ease with which Sarah moved between different linguistic registers. "Mr. Harrison," the professor switched to English. "Sarah has been my best student in 15 years of teaching. At 14, she is fluent in Spanish, like a native of Madrid. She is extraordinary." Harrison hung up abruptly, his hands shaking slightly. "Grace," he said, his voice strangely quiet. "Did you know this?" Grace shook her head, still processing what was happening. "Sarah has always been smart, sir, but I didn't know she." "I started when I was 11, Sarah interrupted softly. "My mom was working 2 jobs to pay for my private school, but she lost her second job because of the pandemic. When I went back to public school, the classes were too easy. So, I decided to use my free time for something useful." Harrison felt a knot in his stomach. While his own children attended the most expensive schools in New York with private tutors paid by the hour, this girl had surpassed any education money could buy using only public libraries and determination. "But why languages?" Harrison asked, genuinely curious for the first time. "Because I wanted to understand the world," Sarah replied simply. "And because I realized that when you speak to people in their language, they stop seeing you as a stranger and start seeing you as a human being." The observation hit Harrison like a punch in the stomach. For years, he had used his Anglo-Saxon background as an excuse to keep his distance from foreign employees, citing cultural differences when the truth was simply arrogance. "Sarah," Harrison said slowly, "you're 14 years old." "That's impossible, sir." Sarah smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "The impossible is just the possible that hasn't happened yet." Harrison turned, looking at Grace for the first time in 5 years. He saw a woman who had raised a genius while working menial jobs, who had sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities. "Sarah," Harrison said, his voice changing in tone. "Why did you come here today? Your mother could lose her job." Sarah exchanged a glance with Grace, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Because I heard you on the phone yesterday," Sarah said calmly. "You were discussing a contract in Japanese with investors from Tokyo, but you made mistakes that could cost millions." Harrison turned pale. "What kinds of mistakes?" "You used gaijin when you should have used gaikokujin for a business foreigner, and you confused Shane with shokuin when discussing staff roles. Small mistakes that completely changed the meaning." Harrison sat down heavily. Those investors had seemed confused during the call, but he had attributed it to connection problems. In fact, his linguistic blunders had nearly sabotaged a $50 million deal. "How did you know I was making mistakes?" Harrison asked. "Because I've been studying business Japanese for 2 years, Sarah replied. "It's my specialty." Harrison looked at Sarah with new eyes. This kid was an expert in international business communication at the age of 14. "Sarah," Harrison said slowly, "you saved my business without me knowing it." "Actually," Sarah said, pulling another document from her backpack, "I did more than that." Harrison took the paper. It was a detailed proposal for restructuring the company's international communications, identifying linguistic flaws that had cost them contracts, and suggesting specific solutions. "You analyzed my company," Harrison whispered. "Just public communications," Sarah explained. "Press releases, transcripts, online documents. I found patterns of mistakes that explain lost business." Harrison read it twice. It was brilliant, detailed, and worth hundreds of millions in recovered contracts. "Why did you do that?" Harrison asked, confused. Sarah took a deep breath. "Because I wanted to show you that value isn't about your parents' money. It's about what you can contribute." Harrison felt something break inside him. For years, he had assumed that success was hereditary, that intelligence was a class privilege. This kid had completely shattered that belief. "Harrison," Sarah said, using his full name for the first time. "Can I ask you a question?" Harrison nodded. "If a kid like me can do this using public libraries, what could other young people like me do with the same opportunities your kids have?" The question hung in the air, like a bomb about to explode. Harrison didn't know that Sarah's demonstration was just the warm-up, because hidden in that beat-up backpack was a recording that would prove that Harrison had lost million-dollar contracts. Not because of linguistic incompetence, but because of something much worse. And Sarah was about to use that evidence in a way that would forever change the balance of power in that office. Harrison was processing Sarah's devastating question when the girl pulled one last item from her backpack. A small digital recorder that made the billionaire's blood run cold. "Before I answer your question," Sarah said calmly, "I need to show you something." Sarah pressed play. Harrison's unmistakable voice filled the office. "These black Americans are all the same. Lazy, uneducated, always blaming others for their failures. That's why I only hire white people for important positions." Grace covered her mouth in horror. Harrison turned pale. Where did you record this?" Harrison stammered. "In the elevator last week," Sarah replied emotionlessly. "You were talking to your vice president about hiring policy. You didn't notice I was there." Harrison remembered it perfectly. He had come down with Robert Chun, arguing about why they didn't promote black employees to executive positions. He thought they were alone. "That's illegal. You can't record private conversations," Harrison exploded. "New York is a unilateral consent state," Sarah replied calmly. "Completely legal. And considering that it documents systematic racial discrimination, I'm sure the Labor Department would be very interested." Harrison felt the world spinning. A recording like this could destroy his company, result in million-dollar lawsuits, and ruin his reputation permanently. "What do you want?" Harrison whispered. Sarah smiled. But it wasn't a childish smile. It was the smile of someone who had planned every move of this chess game. "I want you to choose," Sarah said, walking over to Harrison's desk. "You can continue to believe that people like me and my mother are inferior, and this recording will end up on the desk of every journalist and labor lawyer in New York." Harrison swallowed hard. Or you can prove that you really learned something today. I want you to promote my mother to facility supervisor with a salary of $80,000 a year. I want a scholarship program for young people from disadvantaged communities. And I want you to hire me as a junior language consultant. "You're 14 years old," Harrison protested. "And I speak 9 languages better than any adult you know," Sarah retorted. "Besides, I've already proven I can save your company millions." Harrison looked at Grace, who remained silent, but her eyes shone with pride and a dignity he had never noticed before. "Grace," Harrison said, his voice breaking, "you've raised a genius." "I've raised a woman," Grace replied firmly. "A woman who knows her own worth and won't accept being treated as less." Sarah took a contract out of her backpack. "I've already prepared the terms. You have 5 minutes to decide before this recording becomes public." Harrison took the contract with trembling hands. It was detailed, professional, and included clauses that protected both Sarah and Grace from future retaliation. The girl had thought of everything. "How do I know you won't release the recording, even if I sign?" Harrison asked. "Because unlike you," Sarah said, looking Harrison straight in the eye, "I believe in giving second chances to people who genuinely want to change." Harrison reread the contract. The demands were fair, even conservative, considering the value Sarah could add to the company. But signing meant admitting he had been wrong about everything. "What if I don't sign?" Harrison asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah took out her cell phone. "This recording will go to the New York Times, CNN, and the Attorney General's office in exactly." She looked at her watch. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. "You're blackmailing me," Harrison said. "I'm offering you justice," Sarah corrected. "You've spent years benefiting from an unjust system. Now you have the chance to be part of the solution." Harrison looked out the window at Manhattan, the city he had conquered through a mixture of intelligence and ruthless cruelty. But this kid had just outdone him on both counts. "Grace," Harrison said softly, "do you accept the promotion?" Grace looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I accept, sir." Harrison picked up a solid gold pen and signed the contract. "Sarah Johnson," he said, "you just taught me the most expensive and most valuable lesson of my life." "What lesson?" Sarah asked. "That real intelligence isn't about where you were born or how much money you have. It's about what you do with the opportunities you create for yourself." Sarah put away the tape recorder and held out her hand to Harrison. "Welcome to the 21st century, Mr. Harrison." Harrison shook the girl's hand, feeling that he was making a much bigger deal than a simple employment contract. He was agreeing to see the world with completely different eyes. At that moment, Sarah did something no one expected. "For your information," Sarah said casually, "everything that happened here today was also recorded, including you signing this contract of your own free will." Harrison laughed for the first time in years. Not a cruel laugh, but a laugh of genuine admiration. "You're frighteningly smart, kid." "No," Sarah smiled. "I just prepared better." Harrison thought he had learned the most important lesson of his life. But Sarah had one last surprise that would reveal not only the extent of her planning, but also a secret about Harrison's own past that would change everything the billionaire thought he knew about his own origins and the true meaning of merit. 6 months later, Harrison was sitting at a round table in the Bronx Public Library, surrounded by young people from disadvantaged communities who were participating in the scholarship program Sarah had demanded. The man who once saw public libraries as symbols of failure now considered them true centers of educational excellence. "Mr. Harrison," asked Maria, a 15-year-old Latina girl. Is it true that Sarah got her first job at age 14 by blackmailing you? Harrison laughed genuinely. It's true, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Sarah, now 15 and officially the youngest language consultant in American corporate history, watched from the desk next to him, where she reviewed international contracts worth millions. In 6 months, her corrections and suggestions had generated $200 million in new business for Harrison Industries. Tell the whole story, Maria insisted. Harrison looked at Grace, who now wore elegant suits as a facility supervisor and had become one of the most respected executives in the company. She smiled, encouraging him to continue. 6 months ago, I was a rich but miserable man, Harrison began. I thought my money made me superior to other people. Then Sarah taught me that real intelligence has nothing to do with where you were born, but with what you do with the opportunities you create. But how did she know it would work? Asked Carlos, a 13-year-old boy who is now studying programming thanks to the program. Sarah looked up from the contracts. Because I researched Harrison for months, she said. I found out that he had grown up as a poor immigrant from a small town in Europe, arrived in the United States at age 16 without speaking English very well, and built his empire from scratch. Harrison nodded. Sarah showed me that I had forgotten my own origins, that I had become exactly the kind of person who discriminated against me when I was young. And now? Maria asked. Now our company is the most diverse in the industry, Grace replied proudly. We hire talent based on competence, not last name or zip code. Harrison stood up and walked over to a wall displaying the certificates of the first 50 beneficiaries of the Sarah Johnson Young Talent Program. Do you know what the greatest discovery I've ever made is? What is it? They asked in unison. That when you invest in talented people, regardless of their background, they don't just grow, they make you grow too. Sarah closed her laptop and joined the group. Harrison had every opportunity in the world, she said. But he almost wasted the greatest one of all, the opportunity to be a decent person. What about you? Carlos asked Sarah. Weren't you afraid of failing? Of course I was, Sarah admitted. But my mother taught me that the biggest failure is accepting to be treated as less than you are worth. I preferred to risk everything rather than remain invisible. Harrison looked at Sarah with genuine admiration. The most impressive thing wasn't that she spoke 9 languages or analyzed my company. It was that she had the courage to confront a powerful man, knowing that it could destroy her own family's life. But you had a plan, right? Maria insisted. Sarah smiled. Always have a plan, and always have evidence to back up your position. Grace stood up. It's time to go, Sarah. We have a meeting with Japanese investors in an hour. Harrison turned to the young people. Want to know the best part of the story? Sarah now makes more than I did at her age. Not through inheritance or privilege, but through sheer merit. As they walked to the company car, a Mercedes that Grace now drove as an executive, Harrison reflected on the complete transformation of his life. Sarah, he said, I have a confession to make. What is it? You didn't just save my company. You saved my soul. Sarah stopped walking. What do you mean? I was becoming a monster. Rich, powerful, but completely empty inside. You forced me to remember that true success is when you use your privilege to lift others up, not to tear them down. Grace kissed her daughter's forehead. I'm proud of you, baby. Not for the money or recognition, but for the woman you're becoming. And I, Harrison added, am honored to have learned from both of you that family isn't about blood. It's about people who make you want to be better. That afternoon, during the meeting with Japanese investors, Sarah simultaneously translated negotiations that resulted in a $500 million deal. Harrison watched, remembering the day he had mocked that same girl. After the meeting, a Forbes reporter approached them. Mr. Harrison, How does it feel to be the first billionaire CEO to have a 15-year-old advisor? Harrison smiled. I feel like I finally understand the true meaning of leadership. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about recognizing and nurturing the intelligence of others. And you, Sarah, the journalist asked, what's your advice to other young people? Sarah thought carefully. Never let anyone define your worth based on appearances or circumstances. Your origins don't determine your destiny. And always have evidence to back up your claims. One last question, the journalist said. Do you believe this story can inspire others? Grace replied, this story proves that when you combine talent with opportunity and courage with preparation, there is no limit to what can happen. Harrison nodded. Sarah taught me that true wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in what you build, and that the smartest investment you can make is in human potential. Sarah's story proves that real intelligence knows no color, social class, or age. Harrison tried to use his wealth to humiliate those he considered inferior, but he discovered that he had completely underestimated the power of a brilliant, prepared mind. He learned that true power doesn't come from the money you have, but from the people you invest in, and that sometimes the greatest lesson in your life comes from those you least expect.